right along to our next speaker, who's Daniel Gare. He's going to be presenting a couple of case studies as well. Daniel is the Chief Development Officer at Options for Homes, with a background in affordable market and seniors housing, and his main focus is on creating new affordable home ownership opportunities for individuals and families within the GTHA.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'll just cover a little bit about options, then we'll get into two case studies on redeveloping faith-based lands. Do you mind flipping to the next slide, please? So Options is a nonprofit developer. We've been around for 27 years, and we focus exclusively on the development of affordable ownership housing. And for the most part, we serve those with moderate and middle income and in the GTA. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, like, the whole thesis of Options is to help people get into ownership housing that otherwise couldn't. And, we feel that owning a home is helpful for creating some financial security and security of tenure. And it's hard to get into. And our program is based on a down payment loan program. And we work with our affiliated company, Homeownership Alternatives, to provide down payment loans for people to get into owning a place that they couldn't do on their own. Next slide, please. So just to anchor sort of where options market is, and I know this isn't about options, but I thought it's helpful to start off this way, but just on the continuum of housing, where on the far left, you have those that don't have a home, and on the far right, we're talking about market value condominium and home ownership. We're close to the right, but we sit right after affordable or subsidized rental housing, but before market. So, again, like, this is a typical Options homeowner is someone who's, fully able to get a conventional mortgage, cover the carrying costs of a home, but just needs a little bit of help getting the down payment together to get into owning a condominium. Next slide, please. And the model's interesting and fairly simple. Really what it is that we create development entities that buy land and take it through the approvals process, sales, marketing, financing, construction, the whole thing. And in the end, we provide an investment opportunity to co-invest along with homeowners through this down payment loan program. And some point in the future, when a homeowner decides that they want to refinance or sell their property, they pay back the funds. And those funds come back with a share of appreciation. And as a nonprofit, the real difference is those funds are not distributed to shareholders. They're only invested back into more affordable homeownership development. So that's how the seed equity is developed for future developments. Next slide, please. So we'll just spend a few minutes talking about two case studies. The first is an existing project that was done well before I was involved in Options. So I've managed to get some history on this, but I hope no one asks me any questions about it because I wasn't there for it. But we'll go through what Cranbrook Village is, and that's at Bathurst and Lawrence. And then the second case study is a project I'm currently working on in the Don Mills area, and it's a United Church site that's being redeveloped. Which is in early stages. So I'll sort of show everybody sort of two sides of this. One's complete and one's a proposed development. Next, please. So Cranbrook Village is the Asbury and West United Church congregation, and it was founded in the early 1800s. The original building was built close to the end in 1898, and I shouldn't say 2020, by 2009, there were 3 buildings ultimately on the site. One expansion in 1952 and another in 58. Options came on stream in 2009 to redevelop the lands, which was the church and a vacant parking lot around the lands. And in 2011, construction started, and it was occupied in 2014. And in this case, the church's objectives here, so there's a heritage component, which we'll get into, but they wanted to retain a heritage building while making it fit the needs of the demand for a smaller congregation, make a more accessible facility, unlock and monetize some of the value of the existing land, and create a space that was suitable for a very diverse programming need, including a childcare center, but whatever other programs were serving the community at the time. Can you please, next slide? In 2010, so we'll talk about heritage a bunch here, because heritage, I think, is going to be a consideration for almost any redevelopment of a place of worship. So, and both of my examples have a heritage component on this, but in this case, in 2010, the property was listed and put on the heritage inventory and protected through an easement where a portion of the building had to stay in situ. So two of the original building from 1898 and the building that was added in 1952 were able to be demolished, but the main sanctuary was to be retained. So that obviously fed, really dictated the design of the vacant land and what could be done with the land with that building being retained. Could you change the slide, please? Thank you. So knowing that the site had a heritage property on it, it really drove the vision, and the vision was to include a 275 seated sanctuary from 600. So that gives some indication about how the demand shifted over time for the congregation. They wanted to include a daycare center. Because the future condominium was to be built over the vacant parking land, obviously there had to be replacement parking in a way to connect to the replaced underground parking, which is done through an underground tunnel. And on the vacant portion of the site, at least 300 units of affordable housing. Next slide, please. And like in any development of any sort, you're always balancing objectives. And in this relationship, there's some common objectives where the vendor, being the church, and the purchaser were working together to gain community support, to obtain development approval rights, and making sure they're jointly responding to community needs. But then obviously both parties have their own interests and objectives, where the Asbury and West United Church, they were to remain on site with a modernized structure. They had to consider a plan to relocate during development, which they did with another church in the area. They chose in this case to manage their own contractor. So the site actually had two contractors, the Delterra building, our building, and their own contractor managing their building. So there was two contractors on the site, two builders at the same time. Obviously deal with the fact that they're working with a heritage building and some of the complications that come with that, and making sure there's adequate access to parking for the congregation. On the options for home side, we needed a site that had good access, staging for construction, all the practical things related to construction. We had to take into account all the things you need to do to protect a heritage building when you're excavating around it and shoring and all the things that occur in those instances. Like all of our sites, there has to be enough scale on the site to deliver affordable housing and make it economically viable. And that's often driven from how much parking can you put on the site, really, in many cases, will drive how much density you can get on it. So we had to really look at, what's the parking that you can put in, taking into account what the loss in parking that the church will need to be replaced also needs. And then, of course, we had to create a marketable product. Next slide, please. So the end result, which I encourage anyone who's interested to drive by, it's like I said, it's just north of Lawrence on the west side of Bathurst, is Cranbrook Village at 35 Saranac Boulevard. It is a 341 unit condominium building. It's beautiful. It's really an amazing site to see. Occupied in 2014 and built by Delterra. Next slide, please. So this is a site that's very close to me. I work on regularly. So this is 230 the Dawnway West, and the Dawnway West is the Dawnway Covenant United Church, and it's in the Don Mills part of the Don Mill, the original Don Mills master plan, and this church was founded in 1954 as part of the original plan, and today there's 4 buildings there that have all been built over time. So the first 2 were in 1956, and there was a wing added on in the mid 60s, and then the current sanctuary was completed in 68. We got involved a couple of years ago, and it's been an interesting process, but getting to where we are today, which is really about to submit our initial application. Rough timelines, all things go well, we'll be in construction by 2024, and it'll be occupied by 2027. And again, just to give you everyone's objectives here, the Dawnway's Covenant is looking to right size the physical asset so they don't have more space than they need. It's about resizing it to the current demand of the congregation and the community use. Obviously look at what the value of the land is, monetize and use all these assets to create their long-term sustainability plan to ensure they're here for the next 100 or 200 years. In the case of the Dawnway's Covenant, they wanted a partner organization that was aligned in mission, and that's where options came into play. And then there were some physical things they wanted to maintain, like the stained glass from the sanctuary. Next slide, please. So the vision for the site is a 6-story mid-rise building that will ultimately have the Dawnway Covenant United Church rebuilt into the southern wing of the podium. And the space that they'll eventually get back for their place of worship is roughly 8,000 square feet, which can accommodate 100-person assembly space, multi-purpose rooms, which will continue to be available for community use. There'll be a commercial kitchen, and then a connection to the underground parking. So really just, as I said before, right-sizing without changing what it's currently used for, just shrinking it down to a space that they need. The residential side envisions approximately 270 units of residential units, underground parking, a parkland dedication on site, which is the expansion of the Duncairn Park, and creating a variety of housing types for a variety of family sizes and incomes. Next slide, please. So again, we come to heritage. So this was an interesting one, and I think is an important takeaway for anyone on the call that is looking at redeveloping places of worship. In this case, this site was not designated as heritage, but does have heritage value, and that came up right away in the pre-app. That let's engage a review here and see what's going on. So, ERA was chosen as our heritage consultant on the site and remains. We spent a lot of time studying what the site was, what it is today, working through a heritage impact assessment as part of the application to establish what those values are. And from our point of view, we're going to be proposing to commemorate the heritage value in a few ways. But I think what's important here is that what was clearly established is that the most important heritage value is not the bricks and mortar, but it's actually the existence of the congregation. It's that the proposal is designed to make sure the congregation stays part of the Don Mills community in perpetuity. And that's really what we were focused on protecting. There are, of course, some brick and mortar architectural things that are of value that we will be commemorating in the redevelopment plan. But I just think it was important to anchor it that the most important heritage value is the actual congregation themselves. And next slide, please. So, back to this balancing objectives that I explained on the previous development. I think the common objectives are the same. We're working together to gain community support, to make sure we're working with the city, working with the community, working with all the stakeholders to get approvals in place. And we're working together to make sure that we are accommodating what the community needs now and what the community will need going forward. But then our individual objectives, the Dawnway Covenant United Church is certainly looking at this as a way of ensuring their sustainability for a long time, creating a legacy, and affordable housing is one of those pillars of legacy creating that they wanted. They wanted to remain an anchor, very important to remain an anchor in the community and be visible. So when I show you the final redevelopment plan, it was critical that they remain a very important feature in the future building, and also retain some key design elements. And on option side, we, again, like any construction site, we have to make sure that we have good access, good way of building this at a reasonable price, that there's enough scale and density to make it viable. Again, parking has to be sufficient. We've had to think long and hard about, because now, unlike the other version where they had their own building, here we're going to have a church inside the same buildings. So there's a lot of programming and operational thinking that has to go through, because you're going to have two completely different operations at one point in the future working. And of course, create a great product that's marketable. Next slide, please. So coming to the design that we had today was not easy. It took a lot of playing with blocks, really. And I thought I'd throw this up to just show everybody sort of where we had to go to get to where we are today. And a lot of it was driven from saying, okay, is there a way to keep the existing building in situ? What does that look like? And in the top left quadrant, you'll see the existing condition, where you have these little campus-like buildings and then a parking lot, and then the current sanctuary space right in the middle. And I mean, it's not ideally placed. And also the Dawnway's Covenant United Church didn't want that space, but we still wanted to play with it to see if there's things we can do. We tried to flip the site around. And then we got into this in the bottom left corner, this hockey stick shape or L concept, where the future church space was in the center of the future development. And ultimately the E concept to the south, to the bottom right, really is what drove the final design, and I'll show you why on the next slide. So the final design is this E shape where you have these fingers going into the site, and that had a lot to do with the condition around us. We have neighborhoods on both sides of us, but a vacant. It's a sports field for a school behind us, so very little impact. So we said, okay, well, what happens if we penetrate into the back of the site with residential? Through the pre-app process, some of the feedback we got was where to locate the church, and we decided that it should be extremely prominent. So it is the first thing you see as you're driving north in the Dawnways, and that's I don't know the way of showing you, but that's the sawtooth design brown and red brick that's right on the main floor of the podium there. So that, and for those of you that know Don Mills or are familiar with the site, that is consistent with a lot of the homes that are built in the area from a design standpoint, and consistent with the current sanctuary space they have. So we tried to pick up a lot of the design elements that reflect this mid-century design to differentiate the future church space here. The other thing that we spent a lot of time with is the overall building itself. We tried to mimic some of this feel of a campus by creating these shapes that are stacked on shapes to try to create this, recreate the campus-like setting. So, this is what our vision is, and this is reflecting the proposal. I'm not sharing anything that's confidential. This has been shared with the community and it's on our website. It will be what the application shows, but it's early on. You never know what will actually happen here, but this is our approach. Next slide, please. So, the insights, or what I'll leave you with, is the value of redevelopment to faith-based organizations are, a lot of it has to do with financial, to ensure sustainability in perpetuity. A lot of these buildings are aging, they're costly to keep up. There's a lot of capital expenditures that are coming, immediately or soon. And many organizations want to contribute to other missions, and affordable housing is obviously on a lot of people's minds. Common challenges that I think will exist are, heritage really is something that has to be remembered and focused, that will be something that has to be considered. You're often dealing with stakeholders that represent the vendor that are not development experts. These are often volunteers. So it just takes a different type of communication and work. You've got to consider things about common elements and shared facilities and functioning down the road, and how the two products and residential and place of work will integrate. There's a lot of logistics to consider, even if it's temporary relocation. And both parties will always have their own interests, and that needs to be navigated, because ultimately you are working together for a positive outcome.